So why do I say that it's not that difficult? We know with absolute certainty that if you're choosing prosperity, this is the equation that you must put in place. It's true in Rhode Island, it's true in the other 50 states of the United States, it's true in the United States and every other country around the world. And that equation is investment occurs, jobs are created, prosperity follows. It never ever changes. Investment occurs, jobs are created, prosperity follows. You can't get those jobs without that investment happening first. Just take a very, very simple example. If I own a bookshop, and the bookshop is doing really well, and there are lots of people waiting at the counter to make their purchases all the time, and I say to myself, I need to get somebody else. Otherwise, I'm going to lose some of these customers. So to get somebody else, what I have to do first is build a bigger counter and put another cash register on it. Put some more shelves up to be able to carry the stock and buy some more books. Then I can employ another person. And when I employ that other person, that wage adds to that local economy. But not only that wage adds to that local economy, it's also added in the additional books that I sell that make the publishers more profitable, the people that we bought the materials from for the shelves, and the people that we bought the cash registers from. So the investment occurs, the job comes, and the prosperity follows. If it's that simple, then solving the government's problems would be pretty simple too. You would just have to say to yourself, we need to do everything we possibly can to make investors want to come here rather than go somewhere else. And I think you're doing the reverse of that. I really do. I have something here because I like to look at rankings and ratings. If you look at rich states, poor states, Rhode Island finishes up somewhere around the bottom 10, about number 45. But there's another study here. It comes from CNBC, and it ranks the 50 states in terms of who's the most friendly to business and who's the least. And if I look at the ones that are most friendly, the top of the list is Texas is number 1, Virginia's number 2, Colorado, North Carolina, and so on. But when I look for Rhode Island, I find that you're number 49. And improving. Thank you, Leonard. If I look across the criteria that go into that assessment, the cost of doing business, you rank number 45. Workforce, you rank number 25, not the worst in the nation. Quality of life, which would surprise you, you only rank number 33. When we look at the economy, you rank number 49. When we look at transportation, you're number 48. When we look at technology and innovation, you're number 28. Education, you're number 14. And so it goes on. So what would smart people do? They'd look at what's behind each of those figures and take them one by one and say, how the hell do we get from number 48 to number 1? And if you did that, that investment would then come. It would be coming here rather than going to Texas or Utah or Virginia or Colorado. There's not that much that's different between those states and Rhode Island. So it's not an impossible task. Let me look at some examples of how you go about putting that stuff in place. We do lots of things about regulating. And in the last 2 to 3 years, the idea of regulating more stuff has become very, very much the cause du jour. But why? You know, we regulate people who can cut their hair. I pretty much know when I get a bad haircut. And I can tell you with absolute certainty, my wife knows even better when she gets a bad hairdo. And what does she do? She goes somewhere else. I read something the other day about Texas where they were now considering what were going to be the qualifying criteria for people to be licensed to shampoo hair. And it was 100 hours of study. I'd have thought that most of us sort of learn from about 2 or 3 how to wash our hair, and by the time we're 10, we're pretty good at it. And then you go through the teens when you get pretty bad at it, but later on you get good at it again when you have children. So we do all of this stuff that has no real benefit. So one of the other secrets to this process is, if there's no clearly defined benefit, please don't do it. Please don't do it. Because whenever the government does something, they should be able to identify a clearly defined public benefit, and then they should seek that benefit and measure whether or not it occurs. So the second part that they're bad at doing is not measuring whether or not the benefit occurs. It's one of Leonard's presumptions. If we do this, it just must be right. That is not true. We know from our own lives you do lots of things that you think this is going to be the result, and it turns out that they're quite different. One of the things that we did in my country was that we went to Harvard University and we said to Harvard University, we want you to do a study of New Zealand's competitiveness. And Professor Porter did that study, and he came down and he talked to us, and he wrote a good book on it and showed us all of the things that needed to be done. And we needed to reform and deregulate most of our economy. The good thing was that we actually did what he said. Because in most cases you get the study and nobody does what the study says. So the second part of it is that you have to listen to what that great American philosopher says. His name is Larry the Cable Guy. And what he says is, get it done. As my father used to say to us, there's a time for talking, there's a time for doing, and the real skill is to know one from the other. And often we never get to the time for doing. If I took some of those examples, just this whole regulatory regime, and I'll give you a couple of examples from New Zealand to show what happens when you actually think it through and then do what's necessary. Rhode Island, I presume, has quite a few forests. New Zealand has a lot of them. The government used to manage those forests, and they would sell mature timber to timber companies that would come and cut, maybe for 3, 4 or 5 years. We had given those timber companies all sorts of special incentives, tax-free periods, special tax concessions, to try and get them to do further processing of that timber. And about as much as we got them to do was knock the bark off, but not very much more than that. So we started to think about, what's wrong with this system? And the answer was that for the business person, all of the incentives were wrong. For the government, they were continually cleaning up the mess from clear-felled forests and replanting them and taking on board all of that cost, and then later on selling them at a pittance to somebody else to harvest them. So what we actually did was that we sold long-term leases of 100 years. And they were sold to people from all over the world, to Weyerhaeuser, to APP, to timber companies from China and Korea and everything like that. Now lots of people would say, that's terrible. You got all those foreigners owning those things. Well, it's pretty damned hard to pick the trees up and take them away. You know, they're stuck in the ground. And you're only going to take them away when they're mature, when they have their greatest value. Also, if you come from outside, you actually have to bring your money in to do that work. So the money's coming in, not going out. But here was the thing that happened that was really interesting. Now that those companies had long-term interests in those forests, they started to make massive investments in further processing. Now at that time, if you sold a cubic metre of timber with the bark on, it was worth about $200. If you turned it into dimension products, that's the kind of things that you make tables and chairs and beadings and everything like that, or you see around the walls. If you make it into dimension products, it's worth $2,800 a cubic metre. And what we saw happening was that kind of investment going in. But what also happened was that that investment went into communities where the forests were. So it tended to go into those places which already had the lowest levels of socio-economic development. So we got an additional boom out of that. What also happened was that we found that we got another 35% employment in the forest industry above what we had before. and the value of the forestry industry to our economy went up by 40%. All we did was change the incentives. And now the incentives of the forest owner, the new forest owner, and the government and the community aligned. We wrote all of the environmental requirements into the sale and purchase agreement. Anybody who does contract law knows that if you breach the contract, then the contract can be held to be null and void. If you've just paid some billions of dollars for this asset, you have a very strong incentive not to breach that contract. Otherwise, we just might take it back again. So all of those things aligned, and we started to get really good results.